The farmer buys an old horse out of pity, never imagining the incredible secret it was hiding. Sam hadn't meant to stop at the gas station that day. He usually avoided people, avoided places where he might have to answer well-meaning questions or nod at casual greetings that meant nothing and left a strange ache in his chest afterward. But the old Ford was running low, and the station off Route 9 was the only one within 15 miles. The rain had started about an hour earlier, the kind of soft drizzle that blurred the sky into one long smear of gray and made the whole world feel hushed. Sam pulled up to the second pump and got out slowly, joints creaking like the wood in his porch swing. He moved with the patience of a man who had nowhere else to be and hadn't for years. As the pump clicked into place and the numbers rolled upward, he heard voices from the small office just beyond the window. The words weren't meant for him, but they carried anyway, tired voices, low with worry. I'm not asking for much, the older man was saying. His tone cracked like old leather. He can't plow anymore, can't pull, but he's been good. I need to get the medication, that's all. Sam turned slightly, catching sight of a hunched figure standing at the counter inside. The man wore a frayed cap pulled low, and his hands trembled slightly as he spoke. The gas station attendant, a younger guy Sam didn't recognize, shifted uncomfortably, clearly not eager to take on someone else's burden. No one's gonna buy an old horse, sir. I'm sorry. The old man sighed, nodded as if he had expected that answer. Sam didn't think about it, not really. It was as if something inside him leaned forward before his body did. He walked slowly across the lot, the drizzle soaking into his sleeves. Across the road, barely visible beneath a worn green tarp tied to a sagging fence post, stood the horse. It didn't lift its head as Sam approached. Its coat was pale, more gray than brown, and patchy in places where age or hardship had taken its toll. The ribs showed faintly beneath the damp skin, and its eyes, God. Those eyes were tired in a way Sam recognized. He reached out and laid a hand gently against the horse's cheek. It didn't flinch. Instead, it closed its eyes and let out a long, slow breath, as if it had been waiting for something and was now ready. Sam looked over his shoulder. How much, he asked, quietly but firmly. The old man hesitated, turned, then named a number so low it made Sam's chest tighten. He pulled out his wallet and handed over the bills, all of them, without counting. I'm not buying him to work, he said. I'm buying him because he shouldn't end like this. He named the horse Old Ben on the way home. It just came to him, as natural as rain on the roof. The drive back was quiet, and Ben didn't make a sound in the trailer. Sam had cleared out of the old stable last fall, mostly to keep mice from nesting in the hay, but now it would be used again. He laid down fresh bedding, set up a trough with clean water, and mixed oats with a handful of apples. Ben ate slowly, methodically, never rushing, as if food was a contract he wasn't sure he was allowed to trust yet. Sam didn't expect much. He knew Ben wasn't going to plow fields or haul firewood. Hell, the horse could barely manage the short walk from the trailer to the stall without pausing. But each morning, Sam came out early, brushed the horse's coat, and talked. He talked more than he had in years about the weather, about his wife's laugh, about the way his daughter used to sit sideways in the truck, swinging her legs and asking questions that were too big for her age. Ben never answered, but he listened. And that, somehow, was enough. Word got around, as it always did in towns like theirs. Crazy old Sam's feeding a ghost. Someone muttered at the hardware store. Keeps an animal, that's one hoof in the grave. Sam didn't argue. He never did. Let them talk. Let them laugh. He hadn't saved Ben for them. He had done it because there was something sacred about refusing to let another creature fade in silence. Then, one night, a storm rolled in sharp wind, sideways rain, the kind that rattled windows and made the trees moan. Sam had been in the tool shed trying to fix a loose hinge and must have dozed off in the chair. He woke hours later, freezing, a chill so deep it felt like it had settled into his bones. And then he saw it, standing right there in the doorway, soaked and steaming from the rain. Was old Ben. Sam blinked. He hadn't closed the stable door. The horse had found him somehow in the dark, in the rain, and now stood between Sam and the wind like a sentry. Sam reached up, hand trembling, and rested it on Ben's neck. The heat of the animal felt like fire. I didn't think anyone would still come looking for me. Sam whispered. Ben didn't move, just stood there, silent and steady. After that, something changed. They weren't just two lonely creatures passing time anymore. They were something closer to kin. Winter came hard that year. Snow fell in thick sheets, roads vanished beneath drifts, and the whole world seemed to quiet. One night, there was a knock at the door, frantic, rapid. Sam opened it to find a boy, maybe 10, soaked to the skin, eyes wide with fear. He had been out looking for his father and lost his way in the white. Sam didn't ask questions. He wrapped the boy in blankets and looked out into the blizzard, knowing no truck would make it through. And so he turned to Ben. "One more time," he said softly, brushing snow from the old horse's back. Ben didn't hesitate. Sam lifted the boy onto him, tied extra blankets around them both, and set off. They moved slowly, painfully, the wind like knives and the snow up to Sam's knees. Once, Sam slipped and fell hard. His breath caught, but Ben stopped, solid and still, waiting. Sam gripped the horse's side, pulled himself up, and they moved again. It took hours, but they made it. The boys' parents wept when they saw them, wrapped Sam in a blanket, and pressed steaming mugs into his shaking hands. He only said one thing. Ben brought him home. After that, people stopped laughing. They brought apples to the fence, carrots in paper bags. No one asked questions. No one called Ben useless again. A few weeks later, Sam found old Ben lying beneath the old oak on the hill. He wasn't sleeping. Sam sat beside him for a long while, resting one hand on the still warm flank. Then he buried him there, at the highest point of the farm, with a wooden marker that read, "You were no longer strong, but you were never worthless." Every evening after, Sam would sit in the porch chair, eyes on the hill. He didn't speak much anymore, but he wasn't lonely. Because once you've had a friend like old Ben, you're never truly alone. It started with a sound, not a loud one, just the quiet creak of a stall door swinging open. The kind that would barely be heard unless the whole house was silent, unless it was the middle of the night and you were already awake without knowing why. Sam was. He lay still in bed for a long moment, staring at the ceiling. The old beams etched with shadows from the moonlight outside. The wind wasn't strong, there were no storms, and he was sure, absolutely sure, that he had locked the stable before coming in. He always did, out of habit, out of respect, out of ritual. He pushed the blanket aside, slipped on his boots without socks, grabbed his flashlight, and made his way down the porch steps slowly, joints clicking with each motion. The air was cold enough to make his breath curl into fog. He didn't turn the flashlight on right away. The moon was full, casting long blue-gray shadows across the yard. The trees on the edge of the field swayed gently. Nothing looked out of place until he turned toward the stable. The door was open, wide, swinging slightly in the breeze. Sam frowned. That door was heavy. It didn't swing like that unless someone had pushed it open. He walked over, now switching the flashlight on. The beam cutting through dust motes and hay. The stall was empty, but not empty in a tragic, obvious way. Not as though something had broken free, knocking things over or chewing through a rope. No, the rope was still tied, the bedding untouched. It looked too clean, like no one had used it in days. Sam stood there for a while, unsure what he was feeling. Grief didn't fade in neat stages. He knew that. It came back in loops, ambushed you on quiet mornings or lonely nights. But this felt different. This felt like something had moved, not physically, but in the air around him, in the bones of the barn. He didn't say anything aloud, just closed the door, latched it again, and returned to bed. He didn't sleep. The next morning, the stall was still empty, and he still didn't know why it felt so wrong. He made coffee, took it out to the porch, and sat in his usual chair with a blanket draped over his knees. The hill was quiet. Nothing moved beneath the old oak where Ben was buried. And yet, the silence felt expectant, like the pause between one breath and the next. That same afternoon, he walked the property like he used to years ago, when he still thought of the land as something alive, something that could be protected. He walked past the chicken coop, along the old fence line, to the back of the field where the woods began. He didn't have a destination in mind, but his boots carried him without asking. And then he saw them. Hoofprints. Not deep just enough to disturb the frost-dusted grass. They were fresh. They led from the field toward the woods. Sam knelt and touched one of the prints. He wasn't an expert tracker, but he'd worked this land for most of his life. He knew what deer tracks looked like, what stray cows looked like, what wild things left behind. These were none of those. These were hooves, horse hooves, 4, evenly spaced, slow steps, no sign of panic or gallop, just walking. But no one in town had lost a horse. No neighbors had been through in days. And Ben had been buried 6 weeks ago. He followed the tracks a few yards into the trees before they vanished near a shallow stream. The earth there was soft, but clean, like someone had deliberately brushed away the rest. Sam stood still, listening. The wind rustled the bare branches above, but nothing else moved. That night, he dreamed, in the dream. He was younger, not by much. Just enough that his legs didn't ache and he could hear the wind without it sounding like static in his ears. He stood in the barn, the air golden with afternoon light. And Ben was there, whole and strong. But something was different. Ben turned to look at him, and in his eyes there was something human. Not literally, but knowing. A kind of memory that didn't belong to an animal. Sam woke with a start, heart pounding. It was just a dream. Of course it was just a dream. But when he stepped outside with his coffee, the frost on the porch railing had been disturbed. Not melted, disturbed, like something heavy had leaned there, watching. From that day on, small things changed. The stable door stayed shut, but he sometimes heard sounds inside shuffling, a soft exhale. He started leaving apples on the ledge outside. They were gone by morning. No matter how carefully he watched, he told no one. Who would he tell the neighbors who'd laughed at him, the mailman who only ever asked about the weather? Some things were better left between you and the wind. But he started writing in a notebook again. Not much, just thoughts, descriptions. He'd never been one for journaling, but this felt more like recording, like marking something real even if it was quiet and invisible. He wrote down the days he saw tracks, the nights he dreamed of Ben, the mornings when the world felt just slightly shifted. And as he wrote, he started to remember other things. Moments from before the accident, before his wife and daughter were taken. Times when he had felt watched not in a sinister way, but protected, like something had always been near him, just out of sight. He remembered a day, years ago, when his daughter was fibbed and fell into the pond by the east fence. She couldn't swim. He'd heard her scream and ran, but she was already on the bank when he arrived, soaked, crying, but safe. He had always assumed she had climbed out herself, but now he wondered. There had been hoofprints then, too. He hadn't thought about it until now. The more he remembered, the more things aligned. Not magic, not ghosts, but something deeper, a presence, a bond. One night, as wind howled against the windows, he lit the old lantern in the barn and sat in the corner stall with his back to the wall. He didn't expect anything, but he whispered anyway. "I don't know what you are," he said, "or what this is, but if you're still here, thank you." And for a moment, in the silence that followed, he felt warmth not on his skin, but inside, like the memory of fire, like the first breath after drowning. He didn't move, didn't blink, and then he stood, walked back inside, and left the lantern burning, just in case. That winter passed slowly, but peacefully. No great revelations, no miracles, just the quiet rhythm of days, and the feeling that, maybe. He wasn't as alone as he'd once thought. One morning, he found a single feather on the stable floor. White. Perfect. He smiled and tucked it into the notebook, between pages marked with muddy hoofprints he'd sketched in pencil. He never told anyone about the tracks, or the dreams, or the way he sometimes felt a presence at his side when he walked the fields at dusk. Because he didn't need to, because some stories weren't meant for explaining, some were meant to be lived. The letter arrived without a return address. It came folded inside a plain white envelope, tucked between bills and advertisements in Sam's old metal mailbox. At first glance, it looked like junk. No name, no stamp of a company, just his own name scrawled across the front in a handwriting that felt familiar. It took him half a minute to remember where he'd seen it before. It was Marlene's handwriting, his wife. He stared at it on the porch, standing in the cold morning air, coffee growing cold in his other hand. Of course, it couldn't be from her. She'd been gone 9 years now, a drunk driver on a rain-slick road. She and Emily had left to pick up pie crusts and never came home. He had buried them side by side in the churchyard behind the sycamores and hadn't touched their handwriting since not on birthday cards, not in old school notes, not even in the stack of recipes she'd once pinned to the pantry door. But this, it was hers. The way she curled the S in his name, the slight hesitation in the A that she always blamed on being left-handed. Sam's fingers shook slightly as he opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, aged and yellowing slightly, like it had been waiting somewhere for years. There were only 2 lines written in the center. Ben was always yours. You just didn't know it yet. There was no signature, no date. Sam sat down on the porch steps, the letter trembling in his lap. The wind stirred the dry grass, and for a moment, he swore he could hear laughter faint and fading like a memory trying to return. He stayed there for nearly an hour, trying to make sense of it. It made no sense. And yet, it made something inside him go still. Like a piece of a puzzle he didn't know he'd been working on just clicked into place. The rest of the day passed in a haze. He fed the chickens. He cleared ice from the pump. He checked the fence post that had been leaning too far. But all the while, his thoughts returned to the letter. If someone was playing a trick on him, it was a cruel one. If it wasn't a trick, well, that possibility opened more questions than he knew how to ask. That night, he took the letter to the barn. He sat on the stool where he used to brush Ben and held the paper under the light of the hanging bulb. He read it again. Ben was always yours. You just didn't know it yet. That word always haunted him. It wasn't vague. It wasn't gentle. It was absolute. He slept little that night, and the next morning, as if pulled by something beyond himself, he found the old box Marlene had kept in the attic. It was one of the few things he hadn't thrown away or packed up. It was covered in a quilt and tucked behind crates of dusty canning jars and rusted holiday tins. Inside were photographs, scraps of fabric, a dried bouquet from their wedding day, and there, near the bottom, was a smaller envelope with a boarding slip from over 10 years ago one Marlene had kept when she flew out to visit her sister in Montana. Tucked behind it, folded and worn, was a printout of a news article. Rescue Farm in Helena saves abused horses, names new foal Benedict for his gentle eyes. Sam stared at it. The photo was old, Edimos, grainy. A young foal with light coloring and 2 large eyes stood next to a smiling volunteer. The horse's coat was pale chestnut, his legs awkward and too thin. But even in that blurry photo, Sam knew it was Ben. It had to be. He scanned the article. The horse had been born to a mare seized in an animal cruelty case. The mare had died shortly after birth. The foal had been hand-raised, and at the bottom of the page, in the final paragraph, was a sentence he nearly missed. One of our volunteers, a visiting woman from Iowa, offered to help sponsor the colt's long-term care, saying she felt a strange connection to him. Marlene had been in Helena that month. She had visited that farm. She had met Ben. He held the page in both hands as the attic creaked around him. His heart ached with something unnameable. Why hadn't she told him? Why hadn't she brought it up? Unless she never had the chance. Unless it had been one of those moments she planned to mention later and then later never came. But that still didn't explain how Ben had found his way to him. From Montana to a backroad gas station in rural Iowa. From a rescue farm to a random auction. Unless it wasn't random. Unless it was meant. That thought rattled him more than anything. He went through the article again, slower this time, noting the name of the rescue Willow Ridge Sanctuary. It still existed. He checked on his ancient desktop, the dial-up still groaning in protest. The sanctuary had moved to Wyoming but still operated under the same name. There was even a contact email. Sam didn't write it first, but over the next few days, he typed and deleted the same message 3 times. Finally, He sent a brief note, "I believe a horse originally rescued by your sanctuary named Benedict may have ended up in my care. Could you tell me anything more about his history?" He signed it, Sam Weller, farmer, Iowa. The response came faster than he expected. The next day, a woman named Teresa replied. She said she had been a junior volunteer at the time, but remembered Ben well. He was different, she wrote, not just because he was gentle. There was something knowing in him. He connected to people, especially that woman from Iowa. I remember her vividly. She cried when she left, said she wished she could take him with her. A few months later, he was adopted. Records show he went to a trainer in Nebraska. Then, 5 years later, the trail goes cold. Sam stared at the message for a long time. That gap, 5 years, must have been where everything had unraveled. Somewhere along the way, Ben had been passed from hand to hand, used, neglected, and eventually discarded, until he ended up there, at that station, on that day, when Sam stopped for gas, when the only thing that moved him to act was a quiet ache that had no name. It had never been a coincidence. Sam didn't know what he believed about fate or the soul or anything beyond what he could touch and feed and care for. But he believed in moments, in choices, in love that returned, even in strange forms, and maybe, just maybe, in a horse that had come back to finish something left undone. That night, Sam walked to the top of the hill, to Ben's resting place. The moon was bright again, silvering the grass and casting shadows from the old oak tree. He sat beside the wooden marker he had carved, ran his hand over the letters. You were no longer strong, but you were never worthless. And he spoke, softly, into the wind. You weren't just mine. You were hers, too. Somehow, you were always both of ours. He sat there until the cold crept into his bones, until the silence around him felt warm again. And when he stood, he looked back once more at the stable, then at the stars, and thought maybe the best things in life don't end. They just find new ways to return. The email had barely been sent for 2 days when Sam received a call from a local journalist named Hannah Kessler. Her voice on the phone was soft, a little uncertain, as if she was afraid he might hang up. She explained she'd seen a forum post from someone at Willow Ridge. A woman named Teresa had mentioned the story in a message board for retired rescue volunteers. Hannah had read it, and something about it pulled at her. She'd grown up just 2 counties away from Sam's farm. She'd driven past the old Weller property once as a child, on the way to her cousin's graduation. Now she wrote human interest stories for the Des Moines Register, pieces that didn't go viral but still made people pause between sips of morning coffee. I'm not looking for anything sensational, she said. It's rare to hear about something so pure. A man, a horse, a quiet second chance. Would you consider talking to me? Sam hesitated. He wasn't one for being seen. He didn't want sympathy, but he also felt, somewhere deep inside, that Ben's story didn't belong to just him anymore. Not entirely. If someone could hear it and feel less alone, maybe it was worth sharing. So he said yes. Hannah arrived 2 days later in a dusty Subaru with a cracked windshield and 2 thermoses of hot cider. She had kind eyes and wore a scarf her grandmother knitted, though the colors had long since faded. She listened more than she talked, taking notes on an old yellow legal pad, her pencil worn nearly to the nub. Sam told her everything. The gas station, the quiet eyes, the way Ben stood beside him in the tool shed that night, the blizzard, the beating, the hill. He didn't dramatize anything. He just told it the way it had happened, with long pauses and moments of silence that said more than most words could. When he finished, Hannah said nothing for a while. Then as she folded the legal pad in half and said, "Thank you. This is the kind of story that matters." The article ran a week later in the Sunday edition. The headline was simple: "The Horse on the Hill, How a Farmer's Last Companion Changed Everything." There was a photo Hannah had taken Sam sitting in his porch chair, staring at the hill where the oak tree stood tall against the horizon. In the foreground was Ben's marker. The article was quiet, just like the man it described, but it caught people. Something about it stuck. Letters started arriving, dozens at first, then hundreds. They came from Iowa, from Missouri, from Oregon, even a few from Canada. Some were typed, some scrawled in shaky penmanship. Some were just 2 sentences long. Others were pages, but nearly all of them said the same thing in different ways. Thank you. One woman wrote, "After my husband died, I stopped talking to people, but I read your story out loud to my granddaughter. We cried together, and then we laughed. And for the first time in months, I felt something again." A teenage boy from Michigan wrote, "I thought about killing myself this winter. Then I read about Ben. I printed out the article and taped it to my ceiling. It reminded me to wait one more day." Sam read every letter. Some he read twice, a few. He folded and kept in his coat pocket, just to touch when the wind blew a little too hard. One morning, a package arrived. Inside was a small wooden carving of a horse. The note read, "My father was a woodworker before he passed. He carved this during his chemo treatments. I think he would have wanted it to be somewhere peaceful." Sam placed it on the porch railing next to the old bell. He didn't speak much of the letters to others, but he remembered them all, and gradually, something began to shift. Neighbors who hadn't talked to him in years started waving again. A group of kids from the local school asked if they could come take a photo with the hill. One teacher brought her class to plant wildflowers around the base of the oak tree. Sam wasn't sure what to do with all the attention, but he welcomed them anyway. Not for himself, for Ben, because somehow, a horse once deemed useless had become a symbol for everything people didn't know how to say. For grief, for loyalty, for the way love doesn't always look the way we expect, but shows up anyway, silent, steady, and strong. That spring, Willow Ridge sent an invitation. They were holding a gathering for supporters, former volunteers, and adopted families. Teresa asked if Sam would come and speak. "You don't have to," she wrote. "But your story reminded a lot of us why we started doing this in the first place." Sam hadn't left the county in over a decade. The idea of traveling, of standing in front of people, of speaking, it made his stomach twist. But he thought about the boy in Michigan, the grandmother and her granddaughter, the man with cancer who carved a wooden horse in his final days. Maybe it wasn't about comfort anymore. Maybe it was about showing up. He drove himself the 12 hours to Wyoming. The landscape changed as the miles passed from flat farmland to rolling hills to the open blue stretch of the west. When he arrived at the sanctuary, the wind smelled different, cleaner, more open. A woman greeted him at the gate, gray braid, wide smile. "You must be Sam," she said. "We've been waiting." The event wasn't large, maybe 40 people in total. There were snacks on folding tables, kids playing tag near the paddocks, a guitarist softly strumming old folk songs by a fence. When it was time, they handed Sam the microphone. He stood in front of them, his weathered hands trembling slightly, and cleared his throat. "I didn't plan anything fancy," he began. "Just wanted to tell the truth." And he did. About Ben, about the letter in Marlene's handwriting, about the quiet things that never quite made it into the article. The room or the field really was silent, not because they were waiting for drama, but because they knew the story already. They were there to remember it, to hold it with him. When he finished, no one clapped. Not at first. They just stood, one by one, until the whole group was on their feet, not cheering, not applauding, just standing with him. Standing with Ben. That night, he slept in a bunk above the office, a guest of the sanctuary, in the dark. He thought about all the things that had led him here. A broken man, a gas station, an old horse beneath a tarp, and somehow, all of it led to this, not a crowd, not applause, but connection, the thing he hadn't known he still needed. The next morning, before he left, he walked the paddocks. Horses of every color and shape moved through the fields. Some limped, some were missing eyes, some were scarred. All of them were alive. He stopped by one old gelding with cloudy eyes and a swayback. The horse stepped toward him, pressed its head to his chest. Sam closed his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Not to the horse, to Ben, to Marlene, to whatever force had carried that quiet creature across hundreds of miles just to find him. When he returned to Iowa, spring had come early. The trees were already blooming. Birds had built a nest under the eaves of the porch. He sat down, pulled the wooden carving from his pocket, and placed it beside him. The hill stood steady in the distance, and for the first time in a while, Sam didn't feel like he was watching from the outside. He felt like he was home. Autumn came quietly that year, slipping into the corners of Sam's farm without the usual wind and noise. The fields dried a little earlier. The trees browned not in blazing golds, but in soft copper tones. Like the season knew it had no need to shout. Sam moved slower these days, but he didn't mind. The weight in his chest that used to press down every morning, the one that made it hard to even get out of bed, had eased. It hadn't vanished, but it had softened, like a scar that no longer stung when touched. The porch chair still faced the hill. He still sat there every evening, a cup of tea or cider in hand, watching the sun dip behind the oak. Some nights, a breeze would ruffle the grass around the grave, and Sam would find himself smiling, imagining Ben there still, stretched out like old times, one eye on the barn, the other on the stars. In town, they didn't whisper about him anymore. In fact, more often than not, people stopped by, not out of pity, out of curiosity, out of connection. A young couple once brought their autistic son, who had read the article and insisted on seeing the horse place. The boy hadn't spoken in public much, his mother said, but when he reached the top of the hill and touched Ben's marker, he whispered. He was brave, and then he sat in the grass beside the grave for a full hour, perfectly still. A local teacher held an annual Compassion Day and asked if her class could plant bulbs at the base of the oak tulips, daffodils, and some strange purple ones Sam couldn't name. They'll bloom when it's still cold, she said, a reminder that good things can push through hard ground. Sam said yes. He said yes to a lot more things now. It didn't feel like he was giving pieces of himself away. It felt like something else, like he was passing on a story that needed to be carried. One afternoon, while clearing out the shed, he found a stack of old VHS tapes labeled Emily, 2002-2005. He hadn't touched them in years. The machine barely worked anymore. But with some cleaning and a bit of patience, he got one to play. The screen flickered, and there she was, his daughter, barefoot in the field, hair flying, a plastic pail in hand. "Daddy, look," she shouted, "it's my horse." She pointed at a stick she'd planted in the ground, with a mop head taped to one end. "His name is Ben," she said, grinning. Sam dropped the remote. The tape continued to play, but he couldn't breathe. "His name is Ben." Not a name he gave the real horse, a name his daughter had chosen, years before. He had forgotten that. Maybe it had been buried deep. Maybe he thought he'd just come up with it randomly at the gas station. But there it was, proof. She had named him first. He paused the tape, stared at the frozen image of his little girl with the mop-headed stick horse, and wondered how much of his life had been gently stitched together by unseen threads. That night, he returned to the porch with the tape beside him. He didn't play it again, just kept it near. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "You knew, didn't you?" Somehow, you always knew. As the season deepened, Sam felt a different kind of shift. Not sickness, not pain, just a sense of approaching stillness. The way animals seem to know the weather before it arrives. He didn't fear it. He'd lived more in the last 2 years than in the 10 before, and he wasn't alone. One morning, he began writing again, not in the journal, but on his old typewriter, pulled from the closet and cleaned with care. The clack of the keys was soothing, rhythmic, like hooves on gravel. He wrote the story of Ben. Not just the version in the article, the full version, the parts about the letter, the hoofprints, the boy in the snow, the tape, the strange dream in which Ben looked at him not like a horse, but like an echo of something older. He didn't write it to publish. He wrote it so it wouldn't be lost. He printed it, stapled it, and tucked it in a folder labeled simply, "For the one who finds this." Then he placed it in a cedar box, alongside the letter in Marlene's handwriting, the carved wooden horse, and the photo from the sanctuary. Winter came, and with it, the kind of snowfall that blanketed everything into quiet. On the last day of December, as the sun set behind the hill, Sam walked out into the field one more time. He wore his best coat, the one Marlene had bought him for their anniversary, and carried 2 apples, one in each pocket. He reached the oak and stood there for a long moment. Then he knelt, placed the apples on either side of the marker, and whispered, "One for then, one for now." That night, Neighbors noticed the light in his window, stayed on later than usual. But no one thought much of it. He was often up writing. It wasn't until the next morning, when the mailman saw the porch untouched, that someone knocked. Sam was still in his chair, peaceful, eyes closed, a book in his lap, hands folded. The doctors said it was quick, gentle, just gone. No struggle, just stillness, like a leaf falling when it's ready. The town mourned in quiet ways. The school planted more flowers. The newspaper reprinted the article. Someone carved a wooden bench and placed it at the base of the hill. On the back, burned into the grain, were the words, "He wasn't saving a horse. The horse was saving him." Sam was buried next to Marlene and Emily, but his farm wasn't forgotten. A group of volunteers, some from Willow Ridge, others from the town, turned it into a retreat not for tourists, but for those grieving. People came to sit by the hill, to read the story he left behind, to feel less alone. Sometimes, kids brought apples, and sometimes, just before the sun dipped below the horizon, someone would swear they saw a horse at the top of the hill, pale, steady, watching. They'd blink, and it would be gone, but the feeling stayed. The comfort, the calm, the knowing, because those who have had a friend like Ben are never truly alone. Not in life, not in death, not in memory, just never.